Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into one of the most powerful skills anyone can have, genuine influence. Let's jump right in.
You know, we've all been there, right? You've got this great idea, you're sure it's the right move, but you just cannot get the other person to see it your way. It feels like you're talking to a brick wall. So what gives? Why is it so ridiculously hard to connect and, persuade people?
Well, way back in 1937, a guy named Dale Carnegie published How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it wasn't just a book, it was an absolute phenomenon. And the reason it stuck around is that it tapped into this really fundamental human need we all have. How do we actually understand and get along with other people?
Now, Carnegie wasn't some academic in a lab. Think of him more as a master observer of people. He just watched what worked and what totally bombed in human interactions, and he distilled all of it into this powerful set of principles, basically an art form for dealing with people.
Okay, so this was his #1 rule, the bedrock. Everything else is built on this. And yeah, it sounds simple. Maybe a little too simple. But Carnegie understood something really deep about human nature that makes this rule an absolute must.
So get this, the guy who wrote this quote, he wasn't some misunderstood poet. He was a murderer. As police were literally shooting into his apartment, this is how he saw himself, as a kind person. And that was Carnegie's whole point. If a notorious killer doesn't blame himself for anything, what chance do you have of making your coworker see they messed up a report by criticizing them?
See, what Carnegie figured out is that when you criticize someone, you're not actually sparking change. All you're doing is wounding their pride. It forces them to dig in their heels and defend what they did, no matter how wrong it was. Criticism, as he put it, is like a homing pigeon. It will always, always come back to you.
And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If you can't push people to change by pointing out everything they're doing wrong, how in the world do you pull them toward a better way?
Carnegie found the answer by looking at the most successful people of his time. Charles Schwab, one of the first guys to ever earn a $1 million salary, which was insane back then, said this was his secret. He didn't tear people down. He found something to genuinely appreciate, and he wasn't shy about praising it.
And this story just illustrates it perfectly. A $1 million loss in the early 1900s, that's catastrophic. The normal reaction is to get angry, to blame someone, but Rockefeller, he did the exact opposite. He looked at the disaster and found the one positive thing, that the guy saved 60% of the money, and praised him for it. With one move, he turned a potential disaster into a lesson in loyalty.
Okay, let's just pause for a second. Carnegie's stories are amazing, but are they just nice stories? Or do they hint at something deeper, a set of psychological triggers that work on all of us, whether we know it or not? This is where the old-school art of influence gets a major update from the hard science of persuasion.
Right. So, decades after Carnegie, a social psychologist named Dr. Robert Cialdini wanted to figure out the why. He literally went undercover, taking jobs as a used car salesman, a telemarketer, all to figure out the universal principles that make people say yes. And what Cialdini found is that our brains run on these little pre-programmed shortcuts. He called them click-whir. The world is just too complicated to think deeply about every single decision. So a certain trigger, the click, plays an automatic behavior tape, the whir. It's super efficient, but it also means we can be influenced without even realizing it.
Just how powerful are these triggers? Well, in this classic study, researchers tried to cut in line for a copy machine. When they just asked, "Can I use the machine?" only about 60% of people let them. But when they added a reason, any reason at all, like, "Can I use the machine because I have to make copies?" compliance jumped to an incredible 93%. The trigger word "because" was all it took. Click, whir.
And this is where it all snaps into focus. Cialdini's science doesn't argue with Carnegie's art. It explains it. It's like Cialdini found the psychological blueprints that show us exactly why Carnegie's timeless advice works so darn well.
So let's revisit Carnegie's #1 rule. Don't criticize. He knew from observation that it was a bad idea. But Cialdini's science tells us exactly why it backfires every single time.
So why does criticism always fail? Cialdini points to the principle of consistency. See, we all have this deep psychological need to act in ways that are consistent with how we see ourselves. So when you criticize someone's work, you're not just attacking the work, you're attacking their identity as a smart, capable person. And to stay consistent with that self-image, they have no choice but to defend their past actions.
Okay, so now let's flip it. What about Carnegie's advice to give honest appreciation? to make people feel important. He saw that it worked wonders.
And Cialdini explains this with one of the most powerful rules in human society, the principle of reciprocity. We are absolutely wired to repay debts. When someone gives us something, we feel this powerful obligation to give something back. And you know what? A sincere compliment, some genuine appreciation, that's a gift. It doesn't cost a thing, but it creates this positive social debt, making the other person much more willing to cooperate with you.
Okay, so this has all been fascinating, but how do we actually use this stuff? How do we take the art and the science and turn it into a practical strategy for our everyday lives?
And here's the most important thing to remember. Real influence isn't about memorizing a couple of clever tricks. Real power comes from understanding the why, the deep human drivers like consistency and reciprocity. Once you get that, you can apply these ideas genuinely in pretty much any situation you find yourself in.
So let's boil it all down to a simple playbook. First, instead of jumping to criticism, try appealing to their need for consistency. Frame your suggestion in a way that aligns with their positive self-image. Second, instead of just making demands, use the power of reciprocity. Give something first, a real compliment, a bit of help. And finally, work on building genuine liking. We are just way more persuaded by people we actually like, so find that common ground, offer that sincere praise. That's the foundation.
Look, Carnegie and Cialdini together give us this incredible lens for seeing human interaction in a totally new light. And this isn't about manipulation. It's about connection. It's about understanding that deep down, we all want to feel appreciated, respected, and consistent. So the real question is, how are you going to use this knowledge to build stronger, more positive, and more influential relationships in your own life?